Hello kids, welcome to today's lesson. This is your teacher, Uncle Ernesto. Today we are going to look at a very interesting topic. I believe when you were in class 1, class 2, class 3, you studied living things, and today we are continuing with that lesson. If you look at the environment that we find ourselves, you see many kinds of animals. Some are big, some are small. Some crawl, some fly. That means that all animals are not the same. They have been grouped into different kinds. And today we are going to look at one group called insects. And insects are parts of living things. Let's look at our objectives for today's lesson. By the end of the lesson, you will be able to 1. Tell what insects are. 2. State 4 examples of insects. 3. Name 4 features of an insect. So by the end of today's lesson, you will be able to tell what insects are, state 4 examples of insects, as well as name 4 features of an insect. Now, let's begin by looking at what insects are. What are insects? Insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. Insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. If you look at the pictures on the screen, you will see the skeleton of a lizard. And if you look at this lizard, you will see that there is a stretch of bone from the back of the neck to the tail. And this stretch of bone is what we call the backbone. And we are saying that insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. So if you look at this ant here, this animal ant here, this ant doesn't have this backbone, and that makes this ant an insect. So insects do not have a backbone. And in science, animals that do not have backbones are called invertebrates. So insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. So the key words you have to know here is that they are the smallest of all animals. And secondly, they have no backbone. So insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. And as said earlier, we said we have groups of animals, and insects are the largest group of animals that we have. So if now we know that insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone, what are some of the examples of insects? Let's look at some. The first one on the screen is house fly. House fly. And I believe most of you are familiar with this animal called house fly. For example, if you are eating mangoes, they normally flock around you. If you leave your food uncovered, you see house flies on them. So house flies are normally found in our homes, and this house fly is an example of an insect. The next example is ants. Ants. We are all familiar with this animal, ants. They are very tiny and very troublesome. If you leave your bread or sugar or any sweet food uncovered, you will see that it will invite these kind of insects. So an ant is an example of an insect. The next example is the bee. Bee, as you see on the screen, bee. Bee is also an example of an insect. And we normally benefit a lot from bees because they produce honey for us. They produce honey for us. The next one on the screen, some call it almighty mosquito. We are all familiar with this animal. We are all familiar with this animal. They normally harass us or disturb us during the night. If you don't clean your environment very well, if you leave stagnant waters around, it will invite these insects called mosquitoes. And they are the most dangerous animal on earth. Mosquitoes, because they kill a lot of human beings yearly. So the mosquito is an example of an insect. The next example is the cockroach. The next example is the cockroach. And I know you are all familiar with cockroaches. They are found everywhere. If you open your cupboard, if you don't regularly clean your rooms very well, you see these animals around. So the cockroach is also an example of an insect. The next beautiful insect is called the butterfly, as you see on the screen. Butterfly. And we have so many different kinds of butterflies with so many colors on their wings. So the butterfly is also an example of an insect. The next example is the grasshopper. The grasshopper. You normally find these insects in grasses. I remember when we were in school, during break time, you'll be chasing grasshoppers and then catching them here and there. So grasshoppers are also example of insects. The next example is the praying mantis. The praying mantis is also an example of an insect, and it just looks similar like the grasshopper. Let's look at the last one for the examples. Termites. Termites. These insects normally destroys wood. Termites. They are also insects. So we have looked at some of the examples of insects, and I believe there are certain animals that you didn't even classify as insects. Now, what can we identify about an animal that we can label it an insect? What do insects have that are different from other animals? And that is what we are going to look at now. We are going to look at the features of an insect. What characteristics make an animal an insect? The first feature is that insects have 6 legs. Insects have 6 legs. You know that we humans, we have 2 legs. If you take a dog have 4 legs. But when we talk about insects, they have 6 legs. Insects have 6 legs. Let's look at the insect mosquito. Let's count and see whether the legs are up to 6. We have 1 here, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, we have 5, we have 6. So the mosquito is having 6 legs, and that makes this animal an insect. Let's look at another insect. Now we have cockroach on the screen. Let's also count and see if the cockroach is also having 6 legs. We have 1 here, we have 2, we have 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So the cockroach is also having 6 legs. The bee. Let's see if the bee also has 6 legs. We have 1 here, we have 2 here, we have 3 here, we have 4, 5, and then 6. So the first feature of an insect is that insects have 6 legs. And you can see that all the 3 insects that you see on the screen, we have counted, and they are all having 6 legs. Let's look at the next feature. The next feature of an insect is that insects have 3 body parts. Insects have 3 body parts. That means that the body of an insect can be divided into 3 main parts. The body of an insect can be divided into 3 main parts. Let's look at them. This is an insect showing the 3 body parts. The first one is the head, as you see on the screen where the arrow is showing. The first one is the head. The middle part of the insect that contains the 6 legs and the 2 wings are called, or is called, the thorax. The middle part is called the thorax. So the first part is the head, and the middle part of the insect is called the thorax. The last part of the insect is known as the abdomen. The last part is known as the abdomen. So all insects are having 3 body parts: head, thorax, and abdomen. So let's look at an example of a bee. This is the head of the bee, the middle part of the bee called the thorax, and the lower part called the abdomen. So insects have 3 body parts. Insects have 3 body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Let's look at the third feature. Insects have a pair of antennae. Insects have a pair of an antenna. And what are antennae? Or what is an antenna? Let's look at the image on the screen. You can see a cockroach. We have counted the 6 legs. The cockroach is having a head. The cockroach is having a thorax and an abdomen. Which part is known as the antenna? So the antenna are the 2 long stripes that you see fixed on the head. That is called the antenna. When we say pair, we are talking about 2. So you see that we have 1 here, we have 2 here. So insects have a pair of antennae. Let's look at another insect, the ant. The ant. The ant is also having a pair of antennae. That's one, and then two pair of antenna. Then the last insect, the bee. The bee is also having a pair of antenna. So you can see that this antenna is fixed on the head of the insect. The antenna is fixed on the head of the insect. And what is the use of this antenna? It serves as a sense organ for the insect. It serves as a sense organ for the insect. If you look at human beings, we have 5 sense organs that helps us to interact with our environment. And the insects also have this antenna. Some use it to detect movement. Some use it to hear sounds. So this antenna of the insect is used or serves as the sense organ for this animal. Let's look at the next feature. Insects are small in size. Insects are small in size. And as you can see, when we were defining what insects are, we said they are the smallest of all animals. So insects are small in size. If you take an ant, you see how small an ant is. If you see a mosquito, you see how small a mosquito is. Even though some are bigger than the others, like a butterfly is bigger than an ant. But you can see that of all the animals, they are the smallest. So insects are small in size. The next feature is that some insects have 2 wings that help them to fly. Some insects have 2 wings that help them to fly. So if you look at the bee is having wings, flapping it up and down, and that helps the bee to fly from one place to another. It serves as a source of movement for the bee. If you look at this housefly too, it's also having 2 wings that helps the housefly to also fly from one place to another. If you look at the butterfly too, opening its wings very beautifully, that 2 wings also help the butterfly to fly from one place to another. So some insects have 2 wings that help them to fly. Not all insects can fly. Some also crawl. So some insects do not fly but crawl. So let's look at some of the examples of insects that crawl and do not have any wings to fly. An example is the flea. They crawl, they do not fly. Another example too is the ants. The ants too crawl on the ground. They do not fly. They don't have any wings to fly. And then we also have the termites. They also crawl. They do not fly. So these are insects that do not fly but crawl. Another feature of an insect is that they have compound eyes. They have compound eyes. We humans have 2 eyes. They also have 2 eyes, but their eyes are referred to as compound eyes. And what difference does it make? What is the difference between the eye of an animal and the eye of a human being, or the eye of the insect and the eye of the human being? If you take this housefly, this is the eyes of the housefly, and we call this compound eyes, and you can see it clearly here. Every insect is having this kind of eye, and we call it compound eye. Compound eye. The eye of the insect helps the insect to see things from far but not clear. So if there's a table ahead of us and I'm looking at that table and an insect too is looking at that table, the insect will see the object bigger than I see but I will see that table clearer than what the insect can see. So this compound eye helps them to have wider or larger view of objects. So if you look at this butterfly showing on the screen, you can see that one part is not clear, the other part too is very clear. So if an insect is looking at a butterfly or another insect is looking at a butterfly, this is how the insect will see it. You will see that it is not as clear as we humans see, because they see things very large, and the larger an object becomes, the more blur it also becomes. So their compound eyes help them to see objects very far, but it will not be clear as we see it as humans. So insects have compound eye. So sometimes you see a mosquito on your skin. By the time you raise your hand to hit the mosquito, it will fly away, because the mosquito will see your hand far away before it gets there. So they will prepare and then fly before you get them. So their compound eyes help them to see objects very large as compared to humans, but it is not clear as shown on the screen here. So today we looked at insects as group of animals, and we said insects are the smallest of all animals with no backbone. And animals with no backbone are known as invertebrates. So insects are smallest of all animals with no backbone. And we looked at some examples like the mosquito. We also looked at the cockroach as an example of an insect, the cockroach. We looked at the butterfly, and then ants. So these are some of the examples of insects we talked about in this lesson. We also looked at features of insects. What makes an animal an insect? When we see an animal, what can we see about that animal that informs us that this animal is an insect? So we said insects have 6 legs. So we counted some of the legs of the insects in the lesson, and we saw that insects have 6 legs. We also said insects have 3 body parts. That is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Another feature is insects having pair of wings to fly. Some insects have pair of wings to fly. An example is the butterfly. We also saw the housefly and then the bee having pair of wings to fly. And one of the features too was that the insects have a pair of antennae. And this antenna serves as a sense organ for the insects. Some use it to detect movement, others use it to hear sounds in their environment. So today we looked at insect examples and features for this lesson. Let's take this homework. 1. State 4 examples of insects. We talked about 9 examples of insects. So I want you to state 4 examples of the insects we talked about. And then 2. Write down 4 features of insects. So assignment 1, state 4 examples of insects, and then 2, write down 4 features of insects. I believe you enjoyed this lesson today on insects. I know you have taken some information that you never knew were part of the animals called insects. Hope to see you next time, and remember to finish your homework. Bye bye.
Hello.